Imagine being buried alive by your government because you fell in love in ancient Rome. Breaking a vow of chastity wasn't just taboo, it was a death sentence carried out in total silence under the earth, with only bread, water, and your own guilt for company. Tonight, we descend into the brutal world of Roman punishment, where justice meant theater, execution was art, and memory itself could be outlawed. So get comfortable, pull up your blanket, settle your breath, and let the forgotten cruelties of the empire guide you toward uneasy dreams. From bone flutes in prehistoric caves to blood in the Colosseum's sand, this is history, not as you learned it, but as it truly was: savage, strange, and hauntingly human. In the grandeur of ancient Rome, where senators debated in marble forums and emperors commanded vast legions, justice took forms that would mystify us today. The Romans, builders of roads and aqueducts, creators of law and literature, also devised some of the most unusual punishments the world has ever known. Picture a young girl, barely 6 years old, snatched from the only world she knows, the warmth of her mother's arms, the scent of home, the rough but loving voices of her father and siblings. One morning, the officials arrive, dressed in white, faces solemn and eyes carefully avoiding the hopeful, worried stares of the children's mothers. The house goes still. Even the family dog senses something grave is about to unfold. She is one among a dozen, lined up in the atrium, her hair brushed so many times it aches, her hands scrubbed until raw. She clings to a battered doll, her last tie to a world that will be lost to her before sunset. The women in her family whisper prayers to the goddess Vesta for luck, for mercy, for anything that might shield their daughter from this fate. And yet everyone knows to be chosen as a Vestal Virgin is the highest honor that can befall a Roman family, even if it means a lifetime of sacrifice for their child. The selection itself is a ritual of anxiety and hope, a paradoxical blend of pride and terror. The Pontifex Maximus, Rome's chief priest, scrutinizes each girl for purity, family reputation, and an undefinable spark, the sense that this child might truly be able to keep the flame of Rome burning for the next 3 decades. When the priest points to her, she doesn't even understand the meaning of it, not at first. Her mother stifles a cry, half grief, half pride. There is no turning back. That very day, she is taken from her family home, her feet barely touching the ground, as she is led away through the bustling, noisy streets of Rome. The city seems indifferent to her fate. Merchants shout their wares, beggars tug at cloaks, soldiers march, oblivious. Only once does she glance back, seeking her mother's face, but the crowd has swallowed her already. The Vestal Virgin's residence, the Atrium Vestae, is a palace hidden in plain sight at the heart of the city, an architectural marvel of sun-drenched courtyards, cool stone corridors, and rooms adorned with mosaics that shimmer like still water. The first days blur into a dream. She is bathed in rosewater, robed in immaculate white, and instructed in the rituals that will now define every moment of her existence. Each morning begins before the sun rises. The elder Vestals move like phantoms through the halls, their faces calm, their movements exact. They speak little, their discipline as flawless as the polished marble floors. The younger girls, novices all, struggle to memorize the ancient prayers, syllables that tumble over the tongue like pebbles in a stream. A mistake brings gentle correction, never anger, but the lesson is clear. Inattention to duty can lead to disaster, not just for the individual, but for Rome itself. Her training is relentless. She learns to tend the sacred flame, to watch its flicker with the focused devotion of a sailor steering a ship by the stars. The fire must never be allowed to go out. Rome believes, no, knows, that the city's safety depends on its constancy. A faltering flame might mean famine, invasion, or civil war. The responsibility feels both immense and incomprehensible, especially to a child whose greatest fear once was the dark under her bed. Days unfold into years, each marked by ritual, the grinding of grain for sacred bread, the cleansing of the temple with fragrant water, the weaving of ceremonial garlands. She learns the secret signs, the unspoken hierarchies, the meaning of every gesture and glance. The other Vestals become her sisters, and sometimes her rivals. There are small rebellions, muffled laughter behind closed doors, childish games played with the temple cats, stories whispered by candlelight. But over time, these fade as discipline, and the gravity of her calling asserts itself. Her life is one of both isolation and privilege. She may not see her family except on rare, formal occasions. Letters are allowed, but must be censored. If her parents die, she is not permitted to mourn them as other children might, for her first loyalty is now to Vesta and to Rome. Yet the world envies her. She rides in a special carriage at public festivals, the crowd parting before her like water around a ship. She is cheered by strangers, honored by senators, envied by women who can never hope for such status. Her word, in some matters, is law. Her touch can pardon condemned men. She has servants, the finest food, beautiful clothing. For the first time, she glimpses the brutal paradox of her existence. She is both a living symbol and a prisoner, elevated and confined, revered and watched. The rules are absolute. She must remain chaste for 30 years. No flirtation, no marriage, no child may ever call her mother. Every movement is observed. She is forbidden to appear in public without her white veil. Her interactions with men are limited to what is necessary for ritual or official duty, and even these are supervised. The price of failure is carved into the fabric of the city's memory. Every child in Rome knows the fate of a Vestal who breaks her vows. She is buried alive. The process is ritualized, precise, and terrifying. When suspicion arises, perhaps a whispered rumor, a jealous rival's accusation, a chance encounter observed by a vigilant priest, an investigation begins. The Vestal is questioned before a tribunal of priests. She is permitted to defend herself, but the burden of proof is impossibly high. The gods must be satisfied. The city's safety is at stake. If found guilty, she is not beheaded or crucified. She cannot be executed by any method that would spill her sacred blood. Instead, the priests prepare a subterranean chamber somewhere on the campus Sceleratus. the field of wickedness, a windswept plot of land just outside the city's sacred boundaries. The chamber is small, barely large enough for a single person to stand upright. Its stone walls are smooth, cold, and utterly silent. The condemned Vestal is led through the streets, veiled and barefoot, her white robes trailing in the dust. The people watch in silence. Some pity her, others judge. There is no riot, no rescue, only a city holding its breath as justice is performed in its name. At the edge of the pit, the priests perform the final rites. She is given a small loaf of bread, a jug of water, a flickering oil lamp. These are not gifts, but symbols, a last echo of the comforts of home, a cruel reminder of what she loses. She descends the steps into darkness. The entrance is sealed behind her with heavy stones. There are no prayers for mercy. The city turns away, already forgetting. Inside, the silence is total. The first hours are consumed by disbelief. Surely this is a test, a vision, a nightmare that will lift with the dawn. But dawn does not come. The air grows stale. The lamp's flame gutters, then fades. She is left alone with her thoughts, her memories, the distant sound of Rome's life, continuing above. A world that has erased her completely. Some say she prays, others say she rages. In the end, every Vestal who enters the chamber must confront the vastness of her solitude, the indifference of the city she once served, and the cold reality of her own mortality. The ritual serves more than a punitive function. It is a warning, a myth, a lesson etched into the collective consciousness of Rome. It teaches obedience, fear, the price of transgression, and the impossibility of forgiveness for certain sins. Parents tell their daughters the story of the buried Vestal, not as a caution against faithlessness, but as a reminder that even innocence and devotion offer no defense against the machinery of power. Not all Vestals who stand accused are guilty. Sometimes jealousy, political intrigue, or the shifting winds of public opinion are enough to seal a girl's fate. There are tales of false accusations, of rival priests seeking to consolidate power, of senators maneuvering to disgrace a family or remove an inconvenient symbol. Rome is a city of masks, and beneath every ritual lies another layer of ambition, fear, and calculation. One story persists above all: the case of Cornelia, condemned under the reign of Emperor Domitian. Her trial is the talk of the city. Some say she was betrayed by a lover. Others claim she was innocent, a victim of palace intrigue. When her sentence is pronounced, she stands unflinching before the priests, her voice echoing through the marble halls. Does Caesar think I have lain with a god because no mortal man has ever touched me? The words are both defiant and tragic, and they linger in the air long after she is gone. The city remembers her courage, even as it forgets her face. Meanwhile, the man accused as her lover meets his own fate: a public beating in the forum, death by repeated blows. His end is swift, brutal, and witnessed by hundreds, a stark contrast to the solitary, lingering death of the woman below the earth. The lives of Vestal virgins thus form a tapestry woven from beauty and horror, devotion and dread, privilege and peril. For every girl chosen, a family is transformed, raised in status, honored by neighbors, and haunted by the fear that a single misstep could lead to utter ruin. In quieter moments, the Vestals themselves contemplate their fate. They gather by the sacred hearth, their faces lit by the gentle glow of the eternal flame. They speak in whispers of longing, regret, and resolve. Some dream of the world beyond the temple, of love, children, the simple freedom to walk unobserved through the streets. Others find purpose in their calling, believing that their sacrifices sustain the city itself. But none are immune to the weight of their vows, or the shadow of the chamber that waits beneath the field of wickedness. Even in moments of triumph, when a Vestal pardons a prisoner, blesses a marriage, or leads a festival procession, the memory of those who have fallen is never far from their thoughts. Thus, for 30 years, a Vestal lives balanced on the knife edge between glory and oblivion. The city reveres her as the living embodiment of purity, yet watches her for the slightest flaw. Her days are filled with ritual, but her nights are haunted by the knowledge that her fate hangs by a thread woven of rumor, suspicion, and the inscrutable will of the gods. And so, as the centuries pass, the legend of the buried Vestal endures, a story whispered by candlelight, a warning carved into the bones of Rome itself. It is a tale not just of punishment, but of power, faith, and the fragile line between reverence and ruin. These were the Vestal Virgins, Rome's most sacred priestesses, chosen as children to serve Vesta, goddess of hearth and home. Their primary duty was beautifully simple: keep the sacred flame burning in Rome's most important temple. Yet their secondary obligation proved far more demanding: maintain absolute purity for 3 full decades. The life of a Vestal Virgin came with extraordinary privileges that would have amazed ordinary Roman women. They could own property in their own names, travel in special carriages reserved for the elite, and even pardon condemned prisoners with a single spoken word. In a society where women possessed few legal rights, the Vestals commanded respect that rivaled senators and generals. Their quarters near the Roman Forum were luxurious beyond measure. Fine foods appeared at their tables daily. They received front row seats at gladiatorial games, watching the spectacles that thrilled the masses. Beautiful clothing, precious jewelry, and personal servants attended to their every need. For many, becoming a Vestal Virgin represented the pinnacle of female achievement in Roman society. Yet these magnificent privileges came with an ultimate price that cast shadows over their gilded existence. If a Vestal was found guilty of breaking her vow of chastity, the punishment differed from any other in Roman law. The Romans believed that spilling a Vestal's blood would bring divine wrath crashing down upon their city, so they discovered a solution both clever and terrifying. They would dig an underground chamber, carefully constructed to avoid any chance of escape. The condemned Vestal would be lowered into this tomb while still breathing, accompanied by a small oil lamp, a loaf of bread, and a pitcher of water. Then, with solemn ceremony, they would seal the entrance forever, leaving no trace above ground of the woman slowly dying below. The logic was ruthlessly practical yet spiritually satisfying to Roman minds. Technically, Rome hadn't murdered her. They had simply placed her somewhere and allowed nature to take its inevitable course. No blood-stained Roman hands, no blade touched sacred flesh, no divine anger would fall upon the city. The unfortunate woman would simply fade away in darkness, gradually forgotten by the world above. One of history's most poignant cases involved a Vestal named Cornelia during Emperor Domitian's harsh reign. When formally accused of breaking her sacred vows, she reportedly declared with magnificent defiance, "Does Caesar believe I've been intimate with a god? Because I swear no mortal man has ever touched me." Her courage, though admirable and perhaps truthful, couldn't save her from the underground chamber that awaited. Strangely, the male partners in these alleged affairs faced entirely different punishments. They were typically beaten to death in public squares, a brutal but mercifully quick end compared to the slow suffocation awaiting their supposed lovers. This stark disparity reveals much about Roman attitudes toward gender, divine responsibility, and the different values placed on male versus female transgression. But perhaps even more bizarre than the punishment of sacred virgins was Rome's approach to parricide, the unthinkable crime of killing one's own father. This offense was considered so heinous, so fundamentally destructive to the natural order, that ordinary execution seemed laughably insufficient. Instead, the Romans developed what they grimly called poena culae, or the penalty of the sack. The condemned patricide would be sewn into a large leather sack, along with 4 carefully chosen animals, each representing a different aspect of their crime. A dog symbolized the loyalty they had betrayed. A monkey represented the chaos they had unleashed upon the natural order. A snake embodied the serpentine deceit they had shown their own blood. A rooster, perhaps, signified the vigilance and family protection they had so violently ignored. This bizarre menagerie, along with the murderer, would then be carried to the nearest river and hurled into the deep water. Imagine the absolute terror of those final moments, trapped in suffocating darkness with frightened, aggressive animals, while cold water slowly filled the sack. The punishment was mercifully rare, reserved only for the most shocking cases of filial murder. But its very existence reveals Rome's belief that certain crimes required poetic, not merely practical, justice. Military discipline in ancient Rome involved its own catalog of unusual punishments designed to maintain order among the legions that conquered the known world. Perhaps the most psychologically devastating was decimation, a practice that forced soldiers to become executioners of their own comrades. When a military unit displayed cowardice in battle, attempted mutiny, or committed other serious breaches of discipline, every 10th man would be selected by lot and beaten to death by his 9 fellow soldiers. The survivors of decimation weren't celebrated as lucky. They were marked as members of a disgraced unit. They received barley instead of wheat in their rations, a constant reminder of their shame. They were forced to camp outside the protective walls of the fort, exposed to weather and potential enemy attack. The psychological trauma of killing their own brothers in arms often proved more devastating than any physical punishment. This practice reveals the Roman military's sophisticated understanding of group psychology. Commanders knew that soldiers who feared their own comrades might maintain better discipline than those who only feared distant enemies. The threat of decimation kept Roman legions marching in perfect formation even when facing seemingly impossible odds. One of history's most famous uses of decimation occurred under Marcus Licinius Crassus, the wealthy general who formed the first triumvirate with Julius Caesar and Pompey. After suffering humiliating defeats during the Spartacus slave rebellion, Crassus decimated several disgraced units to restore military discipline. The message rang clear across the empire. Failure wouldn't just be punished individually, it would be distributed among all survivors as a shared burden of shame. As our journey through Roman justice continues, we encounter punishments designed more for public spectacle than practical deterrence. The Tarpeian Rock, an 80-foot limestone cliff on Rome's sacred Capitoline Hill, served as the designated execution site for traitors and enemies of the state. Named after Tarpeia, a Roman maiden who had betrayed the city to enemy Sabine forces, this rocky outcrop became Rome's ultimate statement about the price of disloyalty. The condemned would be marched up the winding path to the cliff's edge, often in full view of cheering crowds gathered below. There were no elaborate ceremonies, no final speeches, no opportunity for last-minute pardons. Guards would simply push the traitor over the edge, letting gravity and jagged stone deliver final justice. The symbolism proved as powerful as the punishment itself. Traitors weren't merely killed, they were physically cast out from the city, removed both literally and spiritually from Roman soil. What made these ancient punishments particularly effective wasn't just their physical brutality, but their intensely public nature. Romans understood that justice needed to be witnessed, to be believed. That punishment required an audience to achieve its full deterrent effect. Executions weren't hidden away in dark dungeons or private chambers. They were performed in amphitheaters, public squares, and prominent hilltops where every citizen could observe the consequences of challenging Roman authority. As Rome transformed from a modest city-state, nestled on the banks of the Tiber, into the greatest empire the world had ever known, its appetite for conquest, for glory, for novelty, grew ever more insatiable. This was true not only in matters of war or politics, but also in the ways Romans entertained themselves, enforced their laws, and defined what it meant to be civilized. The city that gave the world the arch and the aqueduct, the Senate and the legion, also gave birth to a form of public spectacle so unforgettable, so cruel and dazzling in equal measure, that echoes of its violence still haunt our collective imagination. No institution embodied this paradox better than the amphitheater, the grand colosseums, and provincial arenas whose shadows fell across every corner of the Roman world. From the marble and concrete marvel of the Colosseum itself to dusty ovals on the edges of distant provinces, these were more than mere venues for sport. They were laboratories of power, stages where justice, entertainment, and political messaging merged into a performance as sophisticated as any Senate debate, and often more consequential. In the early years, executions were practical and somber affairs. A criminal led to a crossroads, a quick blade, a quiet burial. But as Rome's empire spread, so did its population, and with that, the need for control, for unity, for reassurance that the state was strong and justice certain. The old methods would not suffice for a restless, cosmopolitan, and often unruly citizenry. Something bigger, more public, more theatrical was required. And so, in the heart of Rome, and in every major city, from Antioch to Londinium, the amphitheater arose, a place where tens of thousands could gather to witness, judge, and be judged, where the boundaries between law, legend, and spectacle blurred. Beneath the Mediterranean sun, the amphitheater was Rome's answer to the riddle of public order, a circle of stone enclosing a sea of sand, where life and death unfolded in view of all. Construction alone was a feat of imperial will. Thousands of slaves and artisans working for years, dragging marble from distant quarries, inventing new engineering tricks to raise walls so high and strong they would outlast empires. The Colosseum, completed under Emperor Titus, could hold upwards of 50,000 souls. Its opening games, lasting 100 days, would set the template for all that followed: blood, glory, drama, and above all, order. But the arena was not merely a place for death. It was a classroom for citizens and slaves alike. Here, the values of the empire were made flesh: the might of Rome, the justice of the emperor, the proper place of men and gods. The spectacles were carefully scripted morality plays, each designed to reaffirm the boundaries of the possible, the desirable, and the forbidden. On a typical games day, the morning belonged to justice. Crowds poured in as dawn broke, carrying bread, fruit, and the expectation of entertainment. Merchants hawked roasted nuts and sweet wine beneath painted awnings. In the stands, senators mingled with freedmen and slaves, all eyes drawn to the sand. A trumpet sounded, and the condemned were led forth. Men and women convicted of murder, theft, arson, or defiance of imperial decree. Some were foreigners, captured rebels, or pirates, their fate serving as a warning to others. Others were citizens whose status could no longer shield them. The executions began simply, perhaps a beheading, a swift sword stroke in the center of the arena. But the crowd demanded more, and the planners obliged. Criminals were sometimes tied to stakes and lashed or forced to reenact mythological punishments. A thief playing Prometheus, bound while trained birds pecked at his flesh. An arsonist dressed as Hercules, dying by fire. These early acts set the tone for the day, a reminder that Roman law was absolute, that deviation would be punished, that justice was not hidden in courts, but lived vividly and publicly. As the sun climbed higher, the most spectacular punishments began. Damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. It was here that the line between execution and theater dissolved completely. The condemned might be costumed as legendary villains or tragic heroes, cast in the roles of myth for one last performance. Imagine the chilling artistry: a man dressed as Orpheus, golden lyre in hand, led trembling into the glare of noon, while the crowd roared for music. Beneath the sand, hidden elevators and trapdoors creaked open, releasing lions starved for days. Their muscles rippling in the sunlight, the man began to sing, his voice echoing off marble and flesh alike. A plea, a prayer, a last grasp at mercy. The crowd listened, rapt, some weeping, most cheering, as the lions circled, their tails lashing. When the moment came, the end was quick, brutal, final. The applause was thunderous, not out of cruelty alone, but out of awe. Rome had turned death into myth, suffering into art. Not all executions were so elaborate, but the principle was the same. To die in the arena was to be transformed. No longer merely a criminal, but a symbol, a lesson, a cautionary tale woven into the living fabric of the city. Such spectacles demanded vast resources and organization. Wild animals were shipped from the edges of empire, lions from Africa, bears from the forests of Germania, leopards from Asia. They traveled in iron cages, on creaking carts guarded by specialized hunters, and fed scraps from the soldiers' tables. Some never made the journey. Those that survived were trained, starved, and finally released into the arena with calculated precision. Engineers designed elaborate machinery, trapdoors, pulleys, even entire stage sets to surprise the audience. Water was sometimes flooded into the arena for mock naval battles, naumachii, where condemned men, forced to play the roles of pirates or Carthaginians, fought to the death with blunted swords and makeshift ships. Behind the scenes, priests performed rites to placate the gods. Surgeons waited in shadowed corridors to tend the wounded, though rarely the condemned. Workers with shovels and carts cleared away bodies between acts, sprinkling fresh sand to cover the blood. The show never stopped. Attendance at the games was a duty as much as a pleasure. Emperors, ever sensitive to the mood of the people, lavished gifts of food and money to keep the crowds happy. The games were used to mark triumphs, calm unrest, celebrate festivals, or distract from political scandal. On days when the emperor appeared in person, the applause was orchestrated as carefully as the deaths below. Yet the audience was never merely passive. Sometimes the crowd intervened, calling for mercy, demanding a pardon for a gladiator who fought bravely, or a victim who moved their hearts. At other times, the mood could turn ugly, baying for ever more blood, hurling insults and food at those who disappointed. The arena was a mirror of the city, its fears, its desires, its inescapable fascination with death and defiance. Class distinctions played out in the stands, as well as in the sand. The best seats, cool, shaded, closest to the action, were reserved for senators, equestrians, priests, and the most loyal clients of the imperial house. Farther up, the common people jostled for space, while women and slaves were usually relegated to the very top tiers, their view more of the sky than the spectacle. One of the most remarkable features of the arena was the possibility, however slim, of mercy. An emperor or sponsor could, at a whim, signal a reprieve, usually with a simple gesture of the thumb. A condemned man who fought valiantly, or whose story moved the crowd, might be granted life and freedom. These acts of clemency were rare but remembered, whispered about for years, as proof that even in the heart of cruelty, there was room for compassion. Yet such mercy was itself a performance, a tool of statecraft. It reinforced the power of the emperor, who held life and death in his hands. It demonstrated to all present that in Rome, even grace was subject to authority. Every aspect of the arena was saturated with politics. Emperors used games to celebrate victories, mark the dedication of new temples, or honor the memory of fallen relatives. Rivals competed for the right to sponsor games, knowing that a well-received spectacle could propel them to high office or win the affection of the masses. Discontent simmered beneath the spectacle, too. When grain shipments failed or taxes rose, riots sometimes broke out, turning the amphitheater from theater to battlefield. At such moments, the crowd could become a mob, and the carefully staged violence of the arena spilled over into the city itself. Over time, the nature of the spectacles changed. As the empire weakened and Christianity spread, public appetite for blood began to wane. Emperors, eager to project new virtues, gradually restricted the games, first banning the worst excesses, then shifting to athletic contests and chariot races. By the late empire, the great arenas stood mostly empty, haunted by memories and ghosts. Yet the lessons of the arena endured. The spectacles had served as rituals of social cohesion, reminders of order, warnings against transgression. They taught Rome's people to fear the power of the state, to thrill at the victory of order over chaos, to accept suffering as both entertainment and education. Even today, the ruins of the great amphitheaters stand as mute witnesses to the complexities of Roman justice. Tourists wander the corridors, imagining the roar of the crowd, the glint of steel, the terror of a criminal awaiting the beasts. Scholars pore over inscriptions and ancient graffiti, piecing together stories from fragments. A name carved into stone, a plea for mercy, a boast of victory. In every society, the question of how to balance justice, entertainment, and power remains. The Roman arena may be gone, but its shadows linger in our sports stadiums, our courts, our fascination with public spectacle. The line between performance and punishment, between justice and revenge, is as thin now as it was on those ancient sands. Behind the spectacle, always, was suffering. The condemned man, the wounded gladiator, the slave, forced to fight for survival. These were not merely characters in a drama, but real people, with families, dreams, and fears. The applause of the crowd could not drown out the pain, nor could the pageantry erase the terror. And yet, out of this crucible of violence and spectacle, something enduring was forged. A sense of Roman identity, a story about what it meant to be civilized, strong, and just. The arena was not merely a place of death, but of transformation, where the boundaries between human and animal, order and chaos, power and helplessness were tested and redrawn. In the sand-covered arenas across the empire, ordinary executions evolved into extraordinary theater. Rome's great mirror, reflecting back the hopes, fears, and contradictions of the world's greatest empire. Here, in this space of spectacle and suffering, the drama of civilization itself was performed day after day for 1,000 years. Imagine waking up in a stone cell beneath the city, far below the sunlight and bustle of Rome. It's dawn, but the only evidence is a faint shaft of gold filtering through a high, iron-grilled window. Your hands tremble as you clutch a simple bowl of water. Breakfast, if it can be called that. Somewhere above, the city is alive with anticipation. Citizens streaming toward the Colosseum for another day of games, spectacle, and blood. You try not to imagine what they'll be eating as you sip the stale water and nibble at a crust of bread. You try not to wonder if this is your last morning, but deep down, you already know. A heavy door grates open, echoing in the gloom. Two guards enter, faces hidden behind gilded helmets, their movements practiced and impersonal. One carries a bundle of rich fabric, the other a wooden case adorned with golden inlay. They tell you, without warmth, that today you will perform for the emperor and the people of Rome. You are to be Orpheus, one says, as if this is a blessing. The irony is almost unbearable. You are a condemned prisoner, accused of theft or treason, or perhaps simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Yet today, you will die as a myth. It's a cruel gift, a borrowed identity for your last moments on earth. They dress you carefully, with ceremonial reverence. The tunic is soft, dyed purple and gold, heavy with embroidery. Over it, they drape a flowing robe of snowy linen and fasten it with a jeweled clasp. A laurel crown is placed upon your head, its leaves fashioned from thin, beaten gold. The lyre, beautiful, fragile, and utterly useless as a weapon, is pressed into your hands. Play well, the guard mutters, and perhaps you'll move the gods. He doesn't smile. A parade forms in the corridor outside your cell. Other prisoners, costumed as mythic figures, heroes, monsters, and traitors, file into line. You glimpse a man dressed as Prometheus, chains clinking at his wrists. Another is Daedalus, wings of wax and feathers trembling on his back. Some weep openly, others walk in stunned silence. No one speaks to you. No one wishes you luck. Above, the sound of drums rolls through the stone corridors, deep and thunderous. The crowd's voices rise, a low, eager murmur, punctuated by shouts and laughter. You climb narrow stairs, forced upward by guards whose faces remain blank, unreadable. As you near the arena's gates, the noise grows deafening. You smell roasting meat, spilled wine, sweat, and fear. The sunlight is blinding as the gates swing open. The sand dazzles white and gold, dazzling in its perfection. The amphitheater rises around you in vast, curving tiers, packed with tens of thousands of people, men, women, children, nobles, merchants, foreigners, slaves. Their faces blur into a single living wall, their excitement palpable. Pennants snap in the breeze, petals drift down from the highest seats, tossed by children. The emperor reclines beneath a scarlet awning, surrounded by courtiers and guards, his gaze impassive. A herald steps into the arena and raises a hand for silence. Citizens of Rome, he cries, today you are honored with the story of Orpheus, whose music charmed even the lords of the underworld. Shall we see if his song can tame the beasts below? The crowd erupts in applause, stamping feet and clapping hands. They are ready to be entertained. Your heart hammers in your chest. You force yourself to breathe. to remember the melody you practiced so many times as a child, the song your mother once sang to lull you to sleep. You pluck the lyre, hesitant at first, then stronger as the familiar notes take shape. You begin to sing. At first, the arena is quiet. The people lean forward, enchanted by the beauty of the song, the mournful sweetness of the lyre. Some remember the myth, how Orpheus braved the land of the dead for love, how his music softened the hearts of gods and monsters alike. For a fleeting moment, the line between theater and reality blurs. Even the emperor's gaze seems to soften. You pour your soul into the music, voice trembling but growing in strength. You sing not just for yourself, but for every condemned soul before you, for the silent ghosts who haunt these stones. The song rises, a plea for mercy, a memory of love, a final prayer to the indifferent gods. Then, a rumble beneath the sand. You freeze, fingers poised above the strings. The audience begins to cheer again. But now the mood is different. Restless, hungry. Iron gates rise from the arena floor, groaning on ancient pulleys. From the darkness below, shapes emerge, shaggy, golden, magnificent. Lions, imported from the deserts of Africa, their muscles rippling beneath tawny fur, eyes gleaming with hunger and confusion. They sniff the air, unused to the sunlight, uncertain of their purpose. The crowd's excitement swells. They shout encouragement. Bets are called out. Coins clink as money changes hands. Some laugh. Others watch in rapt silence. A child on her father's shoulders claps her hands, eager for the show to begin. You force yourself to keep playing. The guards have warned you. Stop, and you die more quickly. Perhaps, just perhaps, the music will have some effect. The lions pace in circles, their tails lashing, ears twitching at the unfamiliar sounds. For a moment, one pauses, turning its massive head toward you. You sing with all your strength, channeling every ounce of hope and terror into the melody. There is a strange quiet in the arena. The lions hesitate, confused. For a heartbeat, you allow yourself to believe the myth. That music can charm even the fiercest beasts. That Orpheus's gift might save your life as it once did in story. The crowd waits, breath held, as the lions draw closer, circling, their eyes never leaving yours. The first lion moves forward, silent as a shadow, its muscles rippling with each careful step. You meet its gaze, refusing to run or scream. The song falters. Your voice cracks. The lyre trembles in your hands. Suddenly, the spell is broken. Another lion, younger and more aggressive, lunges. The crowd erupts in cheers, the sound thunderous. The beast's jaws close around your arm, the pain blinding, instant, incomprehensible. The lyre shatters, wood splintering in the sand. You fall, struggling to breathe, to cry out, but your voice is drowned by the roar of the spectators and the triumphant snarls of the cats. The other lions join in, driven by hunger and the madness of the crowd. The guards make no move to intervene. The emperor looks on, unmoved. Blood stains the white sand, bright as poppies in the sun. The pain is immense, but soon even that begins to fade. Your last conscious thought is of the music, of the hope that perhaps, for a moment, you moved someone, anyone, in this vast, indifferent city. The arena becomes a maelstrom of sound and color, the roaring of the lions, the wild cheers, the pounding of drums. Some spectators avert their eyes, others lean forward, hungry for every detail. Bets are settled, wine is spilled, the business of life resumes, even as yours ends in agony and spectacle. When it is over, attendants in simple tunics hurry out to clear the sand, dragging away what remains of the myth. The lions are herded back below, the gates clang shut, and a new story is prepared for the crowd. Another hero, another victim, another lesson disguised as entertainment. But for those few moments, as your song echoed through the Colosseum, something ancient and human stirred within the crowd. Some will remember the beauty of the music, the courage of the singer, long after the blood has been washed away. And perhaps that is the cruelest, most enduring truth of all, that in Rome, the line between art and death was as thin and fragile as the string of a lyre. Yet this spectacle is not unique to your story. Every week, dozens suffer the same fate. Criminals, prisoners of war, political enemies, and sometimes the innocent, all paraded as legends before their deaths. The mechanics of the show are perfected to the smallest detail. Costumes are mended and stored in vaults beneath the Colosseum. Musicians and dancers are hired to create a carnival atmosphere, blurring the horror with celebration. Even the executioners, often slaves themselves, play their roles with precision, understanding that any slip could put them in the sand next. Gladiators, too, watch with mixed feelings. Some see the pageantry and are reminded of the thin line between survival and spectacle. Others harden themselves, knowing that sympathy is a luxury in the arena. For many in the audience, these performances are simply part of Roman life, a release of tension, a reaffirmation of power and order. But for a few, especially the outsiders, the foreigners, the visitors from distant provinces, there is horror and disbelief. How, they wonder, can a society so advanced in art and law also find pleasure in such cruelty? The answer is complex. For Rome, the arena is not merely a theater of death, but a theater of justice. Every performance has a moral, the dangers of hubris, the folly of rebellion, the sanctity of law. The condemned are cast in stories designed to justify their punishment. Their deaths are lessons, warnings, reminders that the city's order is maintained not just by law, but by fear. Behind the scenes, a different kind of drama unfolds. The animal keepers, men from North Africa, skilled in the handling of big cats, work tirelessly to keep the lions hungry and aggressive. They understand the psychology of both beast and man. The animals are fed sparingly, kept in semi-darkness, their senses sharpened by deprivation. When the time comes, they are driven up narrow ramps to the blinding light and deafening noise above, released into chaos they cannot understand. Even the mechanisms of the arena are masterpieces of engineering. Trapdoors, pulleys, hidden lifts. Every detail is designed to surprise and delight the crowd. Sometimes, the condemned are given a weapon, a dagger, a net, a trident, but these are mostly for show. The outcome is predetermined. The lesson is always the same. As the day wears on, the sand is raked, the blood concealed. New stories begin. Perhaps the next victim will be a Christian martyr, their faith tested by fire or beast. Perhaps a foreign king, captured in battle, will play the part of a defeated god. The scripts change, but the message endures. Rome is eternal, its power unchallengeable, its justice absolute. In the evenings, when the arena is quiet and the crowds have gone home, slaves sweep the stone corridors, gathering lost coins, torn clothing, and the remnants of myth. Sometimes, in the silence, one will find a broken string, a golden laurel, a scrap of robe, and wonder about the soul who wore them. In these quiet hours, the memory of the music lingers, stubborn and sad, refusing to be washed away by the next day's tide of blood. And for those who witness the performance, something may remain, a song half remembered, a flicker of pity, a fleeting awareness of the terrible price of order and peace. In time, the details will fade, the singer's name will be forgotten, but the story of Orpheus and all those who followed him into the arena will live on, repeated in whispers and legends long after the lions have died and the Colosseum itself has crumbled into ruin. This was damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts, perhaps the most theatrical form of capital punishment ever conceived by human imagination. Criminals, prisoners of war, and early Christians were costumed as mythological figures and thrown to wild animals while crowds throughout the empire ate, drank, placed bets, and treated human death as afternoon entertainment. The Romans transformed execution into education, ensuring that each death told a specific story about the consequences of defying imperial authority. A convicted thief might be dressed as Prometheus and chained to a post while trained birds pecked at his flesh, recreating the Titan's eternal punishment for stealing fire from the gods. A military deserter could be costumed as a famous traitor from Roman history before being mauled by bears or lions, his death serving as both justice and historical lesson. The sheer logistics of these arena spectacles were staggering in their complexity. Rome maintained vast commercial networks of animal traders who captured and transported lions from Africa, bears from the northern forests, leopards from Asia, and even crocodiles from the Nile. Specialized ships carried these dangerous cargoes across the Mediterranean. Underground, the Colosseum, elaborate elevator systems lifted beasts directly into the arena through trapdoors that seemed to make animals appear by magic. If the imported animals seemed reluctant to attack human victims, arena attendants had numerous methods to encourage proper aggression. They would prod reluctant lions with red-hot iron spears, starve bears for days before performances, or use trained dogs to drive bigger predators toward their human targets. The show, after all, had to satisfy paying customers who expected blood and drama for their entrance fees. The condemned in these arena spectacles rarely possessed any realistic chance of survival. This wasn't gladiatorial combat, where skill, luck, and crowd approval might lead to freedom. This was execution disguised as myth, death dressed up as educational entertainment. Spectators came expecting to see criminals torn apart by wild beasts, and Roman authorities made certain they weren't disappointed by mercy or unexpected survival. What strikes modern observers as particularly revealing about these arena executions is how clearly they reflected Roman social hierarchies and legal distinctions. Not everyone faced the beasts in amphitheaters. Roman citizens, especially those of higher social classes, were typically granted more dignified deaths by sword or poison. The arena was largely reserved for slaves, foreigners, prisoners of war, and others whom the state wanted to make spectacular examples of. Yet, for all its calculated brutality, the arena also provided opportunities for unexpected mercy and dramatic reversals. Emperors could grant sudden pardons with simple hand gestures. Popular criminals sometimes won crowd sympathy through brave behavior and were spared at the last moment. Even the imported beasts occasionally refused to cooperate with execution plans, leading to awkward situations when lions would lie down peacefully next to their intended victims, forcing guards to find alternative methods of completing the death. Sentences, the early Christian martyrs, in particular, transformed these arena deaths into something the Roman authorities had never anticipated: religious theater that actively worked against imperial interests. By dying bravely, forgiving their executioners, and praying for their persecutors even as wild animals attacked, the Christians turned their intended punishments into powerful recruitment tools for their growing faith. What was meant to discourage religious dissent instead inspired it among sympathetic observers. Not all Roman punishments required massive public venues or exotic imported animals. Some were deliberately private, intimate affairs designed more for psychological torture than physical destruction or public deterrence. The furca, known to medieval chroniclers as the fork of heretics, was an elegantly simple device that created maximum discomfort through minimum technology. Picture a metal rod with sharp prongs at both ends, one pressed firmly under the victim's chin, the other positioned against their upper chest, held securely in place by leather straps around the neck. The condemned person couldn't lower their head without piercing their throat on the upper prong, couldn't lift it without driving the lower prong deeper into their chest. They had to remain perfectly motionless, sometimes for days at a time, as every muscle in their neck and shoulders gradually exhausted itself, fighting the device's cruel geometry. This punishment was particularly favored for religious crimes: heresy, blasphemy, public mockery of the gods, or failure to properly honor imperial divinity. The victim would be positioned in busy public squares, becoming a living advertisement for the consequences of spiritual disobedience, while normal city life continued around them. Markets operated, children played games, merchants hawked their wares, all while a human being slowly tortured themselves, trying not to impale their own throat. The psychological impact often proved more devastating than the physical pain itself. Victims reported feeling like they were gradually losing their sanity, unable to move, speak clearly, or even think coherently as fatigue and panic set in. Some actually begged their guards for crucifixion instead, seeing the cross as a more merciful alternative. to the fork's prolonged mental torture. Roman military punishments extended far beyond decimation to include a comprehensive variety of creative torments designed to maintain discipline without necessarily killing valuable trained soldiers. The wooden donkey was one such device, a sharp-edged wooden beam constructed like an inverted triangle or roof peak. Soldiers guilty of minor infractions like theft, cowardice, or insubordination would be forced to straddle this beam, sometimes with heavy stones tied to their ankles to increase the pressure on sensitive areas. The agony was excruciating, but typically not fatal, allowing the army to retain trained personnel while still delivering memorable punishment. A soldier might spend hours balanced precariously on the sharp wooden edge, their entire body weight concentrated on the most tender parts of their anatomy, while their comrades went about daily military duties around them. It combined humiliation with physical agony, designed to make the victim desperately eager never to repeat their offense. Some versions of the wooden donkey incorporated additional sadistic refinements. Metal versions could heat up under the Mediterranean sun, burning as well as cutting into flesh. Spiked variants turned simple pressure into multiple puncture wounds. The Romans, it seemed, never encountered a basic punishment device they couldn't elaborate upon and improve through creative engineering. For crimes against property and persons, rather than the state or military, Romans developed punishment systems that reflected the specific nature of each offense. Thieves would be branded on the forehead with the letter F for fur, thief, ensuring their crime would follow them visibly for the remainder of their lives. False accusers received the letter C for calumnia, marking them permanently as liars whose testimony could never again be trusted in legal proceedings. These brandings were performed in public spaces with iron rods heated red-hot in braziers, the metal pressed directly into facial flesh while crowds watched and cheered. The resulting scars would never fully heal, serving as permanent criminal records written in damaged skin and scar tissue. For slaves, who already occupied the bottom rungs of Roman social hierarchy, these marks often meant the difference between finding employment and starving in the streets. As we delve deeper into the intricate world of Roman justice, the lines between mercy and terror, honor and annihilation, blur in ways that still unsettle the modern mind. If the arena was Rome's public theater of pain, the realm of elite punishment was a silent drama played out behind closed doors, scripted with the ink of fear, duty, and an obsession with personal legacy. Here, punishment was not merely about the suffering of the body, it was a subtle and elaborate negotiation with the soul, the family, and the future. In the shadowed corridors of the imperial palace, in the paneled chambers of senatorial villas, death sometimes arrived not with the roar of a mob or the splash of a body hurled from the Tarpeian rock, but with the soft whisper of parchment, the glint of a seal pressed into warm wax. It arrived with a polite messenger who bowed low, offered condolences, and handed over the emperor's command. For Rome's patrician class, justice was always more than a matter of legality. It was about the delicate choreography of status, reputation, and the web of connections that stretched from the slums of Trastevere to the marble heights of the Palatine Hill. A senator's death could not be as crude as a criminal's. After all, the state was not just punishing an individual, it was sending a message to all who watched and to those who might be forced one day to stand in judgment themselves. To execute a senator publicly risked rebellion, scandal, and the embarrassment of the elite. More than that, it threatened to create martyrs, figures whose suffering would linger in the minds of the people, whose final words could ignite fires that would rage long after the body was cold. Rome understood that sometimes the most powerful form of control was to grant the illusion of choice. To allow a condemned man to die on his own terms was, paradoxically, the ultimate flex of imperial authority. Thus, the practice of voluntary suicide was born, a curious fusion of mercy and command. The emperor, or sometimes the Senate itself, would send word to the accused: "You have lost the confidence of the state. For the good of your house, for the preservation of your name, and in recognition of your former service, you are granted leave to choose the time and manner of your departure." The message was never ambiguous. There was always a time limit, sometimes a day, sometimes a week. The forms of death were left to the individual's discretion: a sharp dagger in the privacy of a bath, a cup of hemlock drunk in the garden at sunrise, even the opening of veins in the warmth of a scented room, surrounded by family and loyal slaves. If the condemned complied, his estate would not be confiscated. His children might inherit his titles. His body would be buried with proper rites. If he refused, execution would follow. Public, disgraceful, and destructive, not just to himself, but to all he loved. Behind this macabre ritual lay centuries of philosophy, custom, and deep-rooted anxiety about the nature of honor, shame, and memory. Roman society was obsessed with dignitas, personal worth, as seen through the eyes of others. To die bravely, stoically, on one's own terms, was the ultimate proof of dignity. For a member of the senatorial class, the mere rumor of a craven or disorderly death could stain a family's reputation for generations. Seneca the Younger, philosopher and statesman, perhaps gave the most famous account of such a death. When the order came from Nero, Seneca did not protest. He summoned friends and family, composed his final thoughts as if writing a treatise, and prepared himself. His wife, determined to join him, tried to open her own veins. Seneca, ever the philosopher, spoke calmly to those gathered, discussing the nature of the soul and the inevitability of fate. When his wounds bled too slowly, he drank poison. When even that failed, he entered a bath to hasten the end. As attendants recorded his every word, his death became a lesson in composure, a strange blend of resignation and defiance that would echo through history. But the path to this privilege was paved with anxiety and manipulation. The condemned man knew that even in suicide, he was performing for an audience: the emperor, his rivals, his descendants, and, in his imagination, the gods themselves. The choice was no choice at all. The outcome was the same. But the way of going, quietly, without fuss, with carefully chosen words and gestures, could still shape the story that would be told afterward. For the emperor, This arrangement offered several conveniences. There would be no public trial, no inflammatory speeches from the scaffold, no risk of a crowd swept up in sympathy. The problem simply vanished, and for the Senate and the other great families, it preserved the delicate fiction that the ruling class was above the messy violence of the lower orders. Yet the psychological toll was immense. Within families, the shadow of disgrace fell heavily. Wives wept behind closed doors. Children begged for clemency. Old friends sent desperate letters, sometimes intercepted, sometimes ignored. The condemned man would often spend his last hours setting his affairs in order, dictating new wills, composing letters of apology, or even, if brave or bitter enough, sending barbed parting words to the emperor who had ordered his death. For the household, these rituals were traumatic. Loyal slaves and freedmen prepared the bath, the daggers, the last cup of wine. Priests were summoned to perform rites, though they might arrive only after the deed was done. There was a quiet efficiency to these deaths, a sense of going through motions long rehearsed, as if everyone involved was acting in a play whose ending had already been written. Yet not all went as planned. There are stories, recounted in trembling voices by later chroniclers, of condemned men who hesitated, who lingered in indecision, who attempted to flee, plead, or bargain. Some tried to take others with them, plotting vengeance even as the hour approached. A few attempted to rally supporters and stage a last-minute coup, but the machinery of imperial power was rarely caught off guard. In almost every case, resistance brought only greater ruin upon their houses. For the wider public, these deaths were the stuff of rumor and speculation. The official word was always the same. He died by his own hand for the good of the state. But behind closed doors, neighbors whispered, was it truly voluntary? Did he go bravely or in terror? Was poison smuggled to him, or did he open his veins as the philosophers advised? Was his family spared, or quietly exiled soon after? Over time, the practice of suicide by command evolved from a grim necessity into a ritualized performance of elite Roman identity, an expected finale to the careers of senators, generals, and nobles who had fallen from favor. It became so entrenched in the culture of the ruling classes that refusing such a death was seen not only as rebellion, but as a betrayal of Roman decorum. In the villas of the patricians and on the pages of Stoic philosophy, this form of death was romanticized as the final gesture of a dignified life. Playwrights dramatized the last moments of disgraced heroes who met death with steady hands and stirring monologues, while poets mourned their honor with elegiac verses. Philosophers like Seneca himself, who was both a theorist and a participant, elevated suicide to a moral act, a triumph of personal control over tyranny. Yet not all were convinced. Some historians and critics called it an elaborate fiction, a staged illusion of freedom under imperial coercion. What looked like nobility, they argued, was often submission wrapped in silk robes, dignity negotiated at sword point. There was an inherent cruelty to the arrangement, a recognition that even the greatest privilege could be a prison. To die for the state was not to die for one's beliefs, but for the maintenance of order, the illusion of harmony. Mercy became indistinguishable from manipulation, dignity from despair. And yet, within this elaborate system, moments of genuine humanity sometimes broke through. Letters of reconciliation were written, old feuds set aside, last acts of charity performed. Wives and children sometimes pleaded for clemency and were granted a small measure of mercy, an inheritance preserved, a home left untouched. Old slaves, released in the final will, wept openly for masters they had served since childhood. Even the emperor, remote and absolute, might occasionally be moved by an appeal and rescind the order, transforming an enemy into a legend of imperial magnanimity. The cultural legacy of these deaths was profound. Future generations remembered the names of those who met their end with composure, who spoke bravely to friends, who died as Romans believed a true citizen should, stoic, fearless, unbowed. Their stories mingled with those of martyrs, heroes, and philosophers, reminders that even in a system built on power and fear, dignity could still assert itself, if only at the very last moment. But the system also left scars. For every story of courage, there were a dozen tales of bitterness, families shattered by suspicion, children growing up in the shadow of a father's forced choice. The cult of dignified death masked a reality of constant anxiety, of men and women watching their words, measuring their friends, always aware that at any moment the next messenger at the door could bring the command to end it all. In the end, the paradox of Roman justice was laid bare in their search for control over enemies, allies, and even the fickle tides of public opinion. The rulers of Rome crafted a system that relied on both spectacle and silence, cruelty and compassion. The arena punished the body, but the command to die punished the soul. To the powerful, it was a final privilege. To the powerless, an unthinkable horror. Yet through it all, the ideal of dignity persisted. The Romans believed, perhaps more than any other people, that to die well was to have lived well, that the manner of one's death could redeem or damn a lifetime of choices. And so, in the quiet rooms of the imperial city, with only a few loyal friends as witnesses, the great and the doomed alike faced their final hour, not with the roar of a crowd, but with a last silent act of will. In this, as in so much else, Rome's legacy is both haunting and instructive. Even in the midst of cruelty, the longing for dignity remains. Even under the shadow of absolute power, the human need for agency, for meaning, for a good death, endures. And in every society that remembers Rome, the question lingers still. What does it mean to die well? And who gets to decide? Imagine a quiet evening in Rome, late spring, when the breeze carries the scent of cypress and honey from distant gardens. You recline in your private triclinium, the last light of the day, slanting through marble columns. The city's distant noise is muffled by thick stone walls and the hush of your household staff. Oil lamps are lit, casting golden pools across mosaic floors. There is wine, your favorite, from the Falernian hills. Your wife, Cassia, sits across from you, embroidering a silken sash by lamplight. Down the hall, your children's voices rise and fall as they play a game of knucklebones, their laughter pure and untroubled. You feel safe, insulated by wealth, position, tradition, a senator, respected, powerful, the descendant of men who fought with Scipio at Zama. For a moment, the world is small, complete, and entirely yours. Then a quiet knock at the door, a pattern you recognize, reserved for messages from the highest offices. Your steward enters, bowing, and announces a visitor. A young man stands in the shadowed corridor. His toga is pristine, his sandals new, his bearing modest, but unmistakably official. He bows deeply, never quite meeting your gaze, and presents you with a scroll, its red wax seal unbroken, pressed with the unmistakable insignia of the emperor himself. All at once, the room seems colder. You take the scroll with numb fingers. The messenger withdraws, as silent as a priest. Your wife's needle pauses, suspended above the cloth. "What is it?" she whispers, her voice barely audible. You say nothing, but you both know. No ordinary business is conducted at such an hour. No good news ever arrives in papyrus, sealed with imperial gold. You break the seal and unroll the parchment. The words are beautifully written, the script flowing and elegant, as though the careful penmanship might soften the cruelty within. But the message is clear, undeniable, unambiguous. Lucius Marcus Valerianus, former consul and senator of Rome, you have been found wanting in your loyalty and discretion. The affairs of the state require your silence. You are granted the opportunity to depart this world with dignity. Do so before sunset tomorrow, in the manner befitting your station, and your name shall remain unsullied. Your property and inheritance will pass unchallenged to your family. If you decline, the full extent of the law will be exercised, and your household shall share your fate. Your hands tremble. Cassius' face is bloodless. You look up and see your eldest son standing in the doorway, wide-eyed, aware, old enough to understand that something has gone terribly wrong. For a heartbeat, you wish this were a dream, but the scroll is heavy in your hand, its seal digging into your palm. All the lessons of a lifetime, diplomacy, patience, self-control, come rushing back. You tell your family that you are tired, that you must think. Your voice is steady, but your heart is chaos. When you are alone, you reread the message, searching for a loophole, a sign of mercy, a hope for reprieve. There is none. The emperor's will is iron, his words final. You have until sunset, one last night, one last day, to decide how you will die. Outside, the city continues, as always. Merchants shouting in the markets, lovers strolling by torchlight, senators whispering in atriums, oblivious to the ruin descending upon your house. The night deepens. You sit alone in your study, surrounded by tokens of your life's work, busts of ancestors, gifts from friends and clients, letters from distant provinces, medals from past campaigns. All of it, suddenly, is weightless. Your power has vanished with the opening of a scroll. The choice before you is both simple and excruciating. If you obey, you protect your wife, your children, your estate, and your legacy. If you refuse, you risk not only a humiliating public death, but also the disgrace and dispossession of everyone you love. This is not really a choice. It is the illusion of mercy, a performance of honor, masking the machinery of absolute control. You spend the night in restless contemplation. Memories rise unbidden. Your father's funeral, your son's first steps, the day you first wore the purple-edged toga of a senator. You remember the city's roar during your first triumphal procession, the cheers, the laurel crown, the oath you swore to defend Rome above all else. You remember friends who vanished in previous purges, their names never spoken aloud again, their portraits removed from family shrines. At dawn, you bathe in cool water, feeling the ache of age in your bones. Cassia finds you, her eyes red from weeping. She kneels at your feet and begs you to take the honorable way out. She is pragmatic, fiercely protective of her children. If you resist, they will kill us all, she whispers. Do it for me. For them, you promise her you will. You do not mention that your courage is spent, that the only dignity left is to surrender quietly. You dress in your best tunic, white, with a narrow purple stripe. You summon your children, embracing each one in turn. The youngest is too small to understand, but the eldest, your son, barely 16, clings to you, sobbing, "Father, you did nothing wrong," he insists. You hush him, telling him that Rome demands sacrifices from all her sons. It is a lie, but you say it gently. You write letters, one for your wife, to be opened after you're gone, another for your son, with advice for his manhood, and warnings about the court's dangers. You sign them carefully, your hand steady, your mind strangely calm. As the afternoon wears on, old friends arrive, summoned by Cassia, or perhaps by instinct. They embrace you, their words stiff with fear, their eyes sliding away from yours. No one dares say too much. "You are a true Roman," says one. "May the gods grant you peace." It is the language of mourning, the ritual of farewells. A priest from the family temple comes to perform the rites. You kneel before the household gods, offering incense, reciting prayers. The priest's hands are warm and reassuring on your shoulders, but his eyes are wary. He, too, knows that these rituals are for the living, not the dead. When your friends are gone and the house is quiet, you walk through the gardens, breathing deeply, memorizing every detail, the scent of rosemary, the song of cicadas, the distant laughter from the servants' quarters. You marvel at how ordinary the world remains, even as yours is ending. Just before sunset, you enter the bath. The marble is cold, the water scented with oil and rose petals, as if you are preparing for a festival. Cassius stands at the door, face pale and set. She hands you a sharp bronze knife, a family heirloom, used in ritual sacrifices for generations. You strip off your tunic and lower yourself into the steaming water. The heat is both comfort and warning. Your pulse thrums in your ears. You say a final prayer to the gods, Mercury for speed, Venus for mercy, Mars for courage. You thank your ancestors for their strength, your children for their love, your wife for her patience. You slit your wrists with practiced care, as you have seen done in the old stories. Blood flows, clouding the water. The pain is sharp but brief, replaced by a spreading numbness. Cassia kneels by the bath, weeping silently. You reach for her hand, squeezing it as the world fades. She promises to care for the children, to guard your name. You believe her, but death does not come quickly. You begin to shiver, your vision blurring. The blood flows more slowly than you expected. Cassia urges you to drink the cup she has prepared. Poison, mixed with honey and wine. You swallow, gag, force yourself to finish. Still, you linger. Hours pass. The lamps grow dim. Finally, desperate to hasten the end, Cassia pours more hot water into the bath. The warmth revives the bleeding. Your heart pounds. Weaker and weaker. You slip under the surface, the water turning crimson. In your last moments, you see your family gathered at the door, their faces radiant with grief, love, and fear. As you sink into darkness, you pray that Rome will remember you kindly, that your children will be spared the worst, that your death will not be in vain. Outside, the city moves on. The news of your passing will be quietly recorded in official annals, your name preserved, your property undisturbed. There will be no scandal, no public trial, no spectacle for the masses. For Rome, it is as if you slipped peacefully from the world, a loyal servant to the end. But behind this illusion of dignity is a darker truth. The emperor's gesture is not mercy, but calculation. By forcing you to take your own life, he silences opposition without martyrdom, erases dissent without drama. Your death is not a warning, but a whisper. Your family survives, but only at the price of your voice. Elsewhere in the city, not all endings are so gentle. Those who refuse the imperial command face horrors designed for spectacle and humiliation. The next morning, in the same forum where you once gave speeches, a lesser noble is stripped and paraded before the mob, his execution drawn out for hours. His household is seized, his memory blackened. Rumors swirl, names are denounced, more scrolls are delivered. Some senators grumble in private, but most keep their heads down. The machinery of power is relentless. Today's victim may be tomorrow's judge, or vice versa. Everyone understands that silence is survival. In time, your son will take up your seat in the Senate, older and sadder than his years. He will remember your courage, your resignation, your final embrace. He will learn to speak in measured tones, to trust sparingly, to honor the gods, and fear the emperor. He will teach his own children that Rome is both mother and executioner, generous and ruthless, eternal and fragile. As the years pass, your story will be told in whispers of the night the message came, of the quiet courage with which you met your end, of the love that endured after you were gone. Your portrait will remain in the family shrine, your name spoken on festival days, your honor preserved in the only way possible, by leaving this world before it could destroy you more cruelly. And so, the illusion of dignity persists, carefully tended by those who survive. The city thrums with life, its ancient stones bearing silent witness to the endless parade of sacrifice and ambition, loyalty and betrayal, the emperor's messengers still walk the night, delivering scrolls to new households. And somewhere, another man, another Lucius, another Marcus, sits alone in the lamplight, deciding how to die with grace when the world offers no better choice. The great philosopher Seneca faced exactly this terrible choice when Emperor Nero accused him of participating in a conspiracy against the throne. Whether the accusation contained any truth remains hotly debated by historians, but Nero's command was crystal clear: die by your own hand tonight or face public humiliation tomorrow. Seneca chose suicide, but even this final act became an agonizing struggle against fate itself. He cut his wrists carefully, but the bleeding proved frustratingly slow. He tried drinking poison, but it failed to work with expected efficiency. Growing desperate as time ran short, he climbed into a bath filled with hot water to accelerate the bleeding, turning his death into a grim experiment in Roman medical knowledge. Even in suicide, Seneca remained a philosopher, calmly discussing the nature of death with friends while his life slowly ebbed away. This practice of enforced suicide reveals profound insights into Roman attitudes toward honor, family responsibility, and social status. Death, for the wealthy and powerful, was considered a private matter to be handled with appropriate dignity. Public execution was reserved for slaves, foreigners, and the poor, people whose deaths carried no political risks and whose suffering provided entertaining spectacles for the masses. The offer of suicide also served practical political purposes. A senator who killed himself quietly at home couldn't deliver embarrassing speeches from execution platforms. His death wouldn't inspire sympathy or rebellion among his supporters and clients. By dying privately in his own residence, he simply vanished from public life, his inconvenient existence erased without creating a martyr or political symbol. Yet not all Roman punishments focused on causing death, whether dignified or degrading. Some were specifically designed to inflict maximum suffering while keeping victims alive as long as possible, turning human agony into a form of artistic expression. The breaking wheel represented perhaps the absolute pinnacle of creative cruelty in the history of Roman justice, transforming execution into sculpture and the human body into raw material for grotesque art. The condemned person would be tied securely to a large wooden wheel, arms and legs spread wide like a human starfish. An executioner, armed with a heavy iron bar or wooden club, would then systematically shatter every major bone in the victim's body. The goal wasn't to kill quickly or mercifully, but to methodically break the human skeleton while keeping the victim conscious and aware throughout the entire process. Arms would be smashed deliberately at elbows and shoulders. Legs would be crushed carefully at knees and hips. Ribs would be cracked one by one with measured precision. The victim's body would gradually fold into impossible, unnatural positions as bones lost their structural integrity. Finally, the completely broken body would be woven through the wheel's wooden spokes like some nightmarish textile, creating a horrific display that could be hoisted on tall poles for public viewing. The breaking wheel was reserved for society's most serious crimes: premeditated murder, treason against the empire, highway robbery, or rebellion against imperial authority. It sent an unmistakable message that certain offenses warranted suffering beyond normal human experience or imagination. Victims could remain conscious and aware for hours or even days, their broken bodies serving simultaneously as punishment for past crimes and warning against future ones. The psychological effect on civilian witnesses proved equally devastating and memorable. Watching fellow human beings slowly transformed into broken puppets challenged basic assumptions about human dignity, divine justice, and natural order. It was specifically designed to terrify law-abiding citizens, and historical records suggest it succeeded magnificently in that goal. Sometimes, if a victim survived longer than executioners expected or desired, they might receive a final blow to the chest or neck as an act of relative mercy. This coup de grace was considered genuine kindness, ending suffering that had already served its primary purpose as public deterrent and imperial statement. Not all unusual Roman punishments required elaborate mechanical devices or massive public ceremonies. Some of the empire's most effective torments relied on simple, everyday materials used in creative and terrifying ways. Execution by hot ash, a method particularly associated with Emperor Nero's creative reign, demonstrated how ordinary substances could become instruments of slow, psychological torture when applied with sufficient imagination. The victim would be buried up to the neck in a carefully constructed pit, leaving only the head exposed to air and sunlight. A metal funnel would be inserted firmly into the person's mouth, and heated ash from sacred fires would be slowly poured down their throat. The ash would clog breathing passages, sear delicate lung tissue, and gradually suffocate the victim from within their own body. Death came slowly, quietly, without dramatic blood or visible struggle. The diabolical genius of this method lay primarily in its psychological impact on observers. To casual witnesses, nothing particularly dramatic was happening, just a person buried in earth receiving what appeared to be harmless dust or powder. But the victim experienced every agonizing moment of internal burning and gradual suffocation, dying inch by inch, while appearing relatively peaceful to spectators. Nero reportedly used this method specifically for personal enemies, whose deaths he wanted to be particularly memorable and symbolically meaningful. The ash often came from temples' sacred fires, adding religious significance to the execution. The victim wasn't just dying, they were being consumed by the sacred element of fire itself, gradually transformed into ash through divine intervention. The Romans also developed the infamous tunica molesta, usually translated as annoying tunic, though annoying hardly captures its true horrific nature. This was a special garment soaked thoroughly in pitch, tar, and combustible oils, fitted tightly to the condemned person's body, and then deliberately set ablaze while they wore it. The victim became a human torch, burning alive while simultaneously serving as practical illumination for evening entertainment events. Emperor Nero famously used these human torches to light his elaborate garden parties, combining efficient lighting with spectacular execution in typical Roman fashion. The condemned would burn slowly for many minutes or even hours, their agonized screams providing an atmospheric soundtrack to imperial dining and conversation. Flames would gradually consume flesh and bone, while distinguished guests ate delicacies and discussed politics, death becoming merely ambient decoration for social events. The tunica molesta was sometimes designed to reference classical mythology, turning execution into educational theater for cultured audiences. Victims might be specifically dressed as Hercules, wearing the poisoned shirt that caused his legendary, agonizing death, making their torment both punishment and literary lesson. Romans deeply loved their cultural references, incorporating classical education even into matters of life and death. As we approach the conclusion of our journey through Rome's most extraordinary punishments, it becomes necessary to pause, not merely to gasp at the vivid cruelty of the past, but to reflect on what such practices say about the deeper machinery of human nature. The world of Rome is gone, but its echoes linger in the stories we tell, the monuments we visit, and most of all, the silences that surround the missing names, the erased faces, the vanished voices. However shocking these ancient cruelties seem to modern sensibilities, they were not the inventions of madmen or monsters, but the logical expressions of a system built on order, spectacle, and the desperate need to control not only the body, but the mind, the soul, and even memory itself. Roman justice operated within a complex, almost theatrical dance of law, tradition, and hierarchy, a dance choreographed by fear as much as by aspiration. The greatest empire the world had ever known understood that sometimes the most lasting wounds are those carved into the fabric of history itself. Among all Rome's punishments, perhaps the most terrifying was not inflicted on flesh, but on the idea of existence. Damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory, while crucifixion, beheading, and being torn apart by beasts left visible marks on society, damnatio memoriae was designed to erase the very possibility that a person had ever existed. To suffer this fate was to become a living ghost, erased not by death, but by the careful, cold hand of official oblivion. Imagine the decree arriving at dawn, read aloud in the Senate, posted on city walls, whispered across the empire. Let the name of this traitor be struck from every record. Let every statue be defaced, every portrait altered. Let every inscription that once bore his name bear now only silence. And then the work would begin, not just by imperial decree, but by the hands of stonemasons, scribes, and slaves tasked with the unmaking of a life. A senator's likeness might be hammered from a frieze above a forum. Coins would be melted, reminted without his face. In the public baths, men would avert their eyes from the scarred wall where once a name was proudly carved. In the villas of the wealthy, family members would hurriedly scrape away traces of kinship, burning letters, hiding paintings, instructing children never to speak of the fallen relative again. The condemned's family faced a terrible dilemma: resist and risk their own destruction, or comply and join the machinery of forgetting. Some secretly preserved a lock of hair, a seal, a whispered story passed in darkness. Others surrendered utterly, erasing generations of memories for the sake of survival. A child might grow up not knowing why a stone in the garden bore a half-erased inscription, why old servants wept on certain feast days, why the family tree had strange, unexplained gaps. Damnatio memoriae was more than a legal punishment. It was an assault on identity, community, and the meaning of legacy itself. In a society obsessed with fama, reputation, and gloria, honor, to lose one's place in the chain of remembrance was a fate worse than mere execution. The dead could not speak for themselves, only the living could tell their stories. And when even the living were forbidden, the person became a shadow. No lessons learned, no warnings left for descendants, no solace for grieving friends. There was something almost ritualistic about the process. It was a purification, a way for Rome to wash its hands of uncomfortable memories, inconvenient truths, political rivals, or failed emperors. The act of erasure became an assertion of control, not only over the present, but over the story the future would inherit. And yet, as with all things Roman, this system was haunted by irony. In the very act of erasing, the state often drew more attention to what was missing. Travelers would ask, "Who was this man whose name is gouged out so carefully?" In some cases, as with Emperor Geta, the removal of his image from mosaics and paintings left spectral gaps that fascinated rather than frightened. The empty spaces became puzzles, hints at forbidden stories, reminders that even the mightiest empire could not fully master the flow of memory. Consider for a moment a craftsman in Ostia, tasked with scraping a senator's name from a triumphal arch. As he chisels, dust filling the air, he wonders about the man he is erasing. Was he truly a traitor? Was he beloved by his slaves, or feared by his clients? What secret did he take to the grave? The craftsman knows that today's hero can be tomorrow's villain, and that one careless word could see his own name one day reduced to rubble. In the home of the condemned, a widow gathers her children, warning them never to speak their father's name outside these walls. She tucks a signet ring into her dress, a forbidden relic of a forbidden man. At night, she tells her eldest, "Your father loved music. He taught you the lyre. Remember that, even if you must forget everything else." And elsewhere, in a scriptorium in Alexandria, a scholar debates whether to copy a passage from a banned philosopher. He hesitates, then writes the words in code, hoping that future generations will read between the lines. The use of damnatio memoriae was never simply about the individual. It was a signal to all who might challenge imperial authority. It reminded the powerful that loyalty was not enough. Favor could be withdrawn, the record wiped clean, the story retold. It encouraged caution, conformity, the suppression of inconvenient truths. Yet, in its thoroughness, it also bred resistance, a quiet culture of remembering in secret, of hiding tokens, of passing down forbidden tales by word of mouth. Historians and archaeologists still find traces of these lost lives. A statue with the face chiseled out, but the body left intact, a tombstone with only dates, the name eradicated, a biography with abrupt, unexplained gaps. And so, even as Rome tried to master memory, it paradoxically preserved the very anxiety it sought to erase. The shadow of what was missing became as powerful as any official story. And yet, as the cruelty of damnatio memoriae reached its height, something unexpected began to stir in the hidden corners of the empire. In the same age that mastered erasure, humanity's urge to create, to remember, to celebrate life through beauty was never extinguished. Indeed, in the face of loss and violence, the need for expression became all the more urgent. Out of the silence left by erased names and forbidden stories, new forms of art and memory arose. In the homes of the grieving, music was played to comfort the living and honor the dead. Songs became vessels of memory, melodies carrying histories that could not be written in stone, but lived in breath and vibration, passing from mouth to ear, from parent to child, immune to chisels and decrees. In the wake of the harshest punishments, the spirit of creation blossomed. The same hands that once carved names into marble now crafted delicate instruments, painted frescoes of mythical scenes, or wove tapestries that told stories too dangerous for public inscription. In the shadows, where stories could not be spoken aloud, the rhythm of drums, the trill of flutes, and the strum of lyres filled the void. What, then, does this tell us about the deeper machinery of the human soul? It is that even in a world that weaponized forgetting, the desire to remember could not be killed. Even in a society that turned cruelty into art, the human longing for beauty and connection endured. The same mind that devised ingenious tortures also gave us poetry, architecture, philosophy, and music. In the end, the Roman story is not just one of violence, but of the struggle between darkness and light, between the drive to erase and the longing to create, between the official silence of damnatio memoriae and the living noise of a song carried on. The wind, let us return, finally, to a quiet evening in Rome. The sun has set behind the hills, and the city is alive with the soft clamor of daily life. In a small house by the Tiber, a young girl sits with her grandmother. The old woman plucks gently at a lyre, teaching her a song older than the empire itself, a melody her own mother once sang when all the world was different. The lyrics speak of loss and hope, of names forgotten, but feelings unbroken, of the cycle of sorrow and renewal. The girl listens, then joins in, her clear voice threading through the darkness. Remember this, her grandmother says. Even when marble is broken and words are banned, music will remember for us. This is where the Roman story turns from cruelty to creation. For if damnatio memoriae was the ultimate violence against memory, then music was the ultimate rebellion, a way for the powerless to reclaim voice, for the forgotten to become immortal through rhythm and tune. In the same empire that erased faces from statues, people learned to write invisible histories in song. Over time, as the dust of fallen empires settled, these songs, often anonymous, always resilient, became the thread that stitched generations together. From lullabies to hymns, from battle marches to funeral laments, music became the carrier of what could not be spoken. It consoled the exiled, honored the dead, and gave courage to the living. In the centuries to come, the official history of Rome would be pieced together from the remnants of broken statues and the gaps in ancient texts. But in the hearts of ordinary people, the true story was never fully lost. It lived on in melodies that no emperor could silence, in dances that no law could forbid, in the quiet hum of a tune remembered at dusk. As we leave the world of ancient punishments, let us carry with us the lesson Rome teaches at its deepest level, that cruelty, no matter how systematic, cannot erase the fundamental human hunger for connection, for remembrance, for beauty. Where the stonecutter's chisel fails, the singer's voice endures. Where the official decree commands silence, the breath of a flute or the beat of a drum rises all the louder. The same empire that perfected the art of forgetting also gave birth, against all odds, to the most lasting arts of memory. And so, from the shadow of damnatio memoriae, we emerge into the light of music, a creation not just of Rome, but of the universal human spirit. In the end, what survives is not the erasure, but the song. What endures is not the silence, but the memory passed hand to hand, voice to voice, across the dark, into the dawn. It is a strange thing, the power to unmake a life not only in the flesh, but in memory itself. Most deaths are final in the moment. A blade flashes, poison is swallowed, a prayer dies on the lips, and all that is left is silence and grief. But for Geta, Emperor of Rome, son of Severus, brother of Caracalla, the end was more profound and more enduring than any ordinary death. His was an erasure so meticulous that for centuries scholars debated whether he had truly existed at all. Imagine the Palatine Hill on a rain-washed winter's night in 211 AD. Two brothers, Caracalla and Geta, stand on opposite sides of a marble atrium, separated by more than just space. Their mother, Julia Domna, her hair threaded with gray, pleads for reconciliation. She begs for peace, for the good of Rome, for the honor of their father's memory. Each man wears the purple. Each commands legions, loyal senators, and the divided affections of the city. Their father, Septimius Severus, is not yet cold in his tomb, but already his empire trembles. Caracalla, fierce and restless, has arranged this meeting under the pretense of brotherly forgiveness. His eyes are sharp, haunted by months of rivalry and rumors of plots. Geta, younger by a handful of years, is tired, weary, and homesick for a childhood long since lost. He wishes only for peace, so he says, but there is no peace in a palace built on ambition. Suddenly, the trap is sprung. Imperial guards rush in, swords gleaming. Julia throws herself between her sons, but it is too late. Geta is stabbed, blood blooming on his tunic, staining his mother's hands as she cradles him. Caracalla looks on, his face unreadable. There is a moment of horror, then silence. In that silence, something ancient dies. Not just a life, but a lineage, a vision, an idea of Rome itself as a family rather than a machine of power. Caracalla's next actions are immediate and ruthless. The palace is locked down. Geta's loyalists are hunted through torch-lit corridors, their cries echoing off the marble. Julia Domna is led away, her grief weaponized as evidence of her complicity, or at best, her powerlessness. But it is not enough for Caracalla to have won the flesh. He must conquer the memory as well. Damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. It is a punishment reserved for traitors, enemies of the state, and now for a brother and co-emperor. It is as if Caracalla fears the very idea of Geta more than his sword ever did. The process begins with a single edict delivered to every corner of the empire. The Senate, by decree of the divine emperor, orders the immediate erasure of all public mention, representation, and commemoration of Publius Septimius Geta. Let his name be struck from all records, his image defaced, his memory cursed for all time. Let no citizen speak in his favor, nor mourn his passing. Messengers scatter in all directions, carrying the imperial will across mountains, deserts, rivers, and seas. The machinery of erasure rumbles to life. Stonecutters and masons are summoned to public works. All over the city, Geta's name is visible, inscribed in triumphal arches, etched in the foundations of temples, carved into the plinths of statues, gilded upon the walls of his own baths and theaters. At the Arch of Septimius, Severus in the Forum, masons climb scaffolds by torchlight, chipping away at marble, scraping away the letters Geta ag ustus, nostratus, until only dust remains. To the untrained eye, it is as if the stone had always been blank. Elsewhere, the process is less precise. Mosaics bearing Geta's face are scraped away with knives, leaving empty silhouettes, ghostly outlines where a brother once smiled beside his father and sibling. Bronze busts are melted down. Coins bearing his profile are recalled, destroyed, or clumsily defaced with counterstamps. In the palaces, scribes tear out pages from official chronicles, snipping out passages of Geta's proclamations with surgical care. Paintings are painted over. In public, the word Geta becomes poison. Friends, senators, servants, everyone who ever benefited from Geta's favor rush to distance themselves, burning letters, hiding tokens, denying old loyalties. Children who once learned to recite the names of the emperors are given new lessons. Caracalla alone is our Augustus, teachers intone. There was no co-ruler. There was only one star in the Roman sky. The edict travels to Africa, to the great city of Leptis Magna, where Geta was born, where his ancestors are buried. Here, his statues are pulled down in the market square, his name scrubbed from civic monuments. The city's elders, some of them Geta's kin, look away as soldiers do their work. A few weep, most remain silent. It is safer that way. In Britain, where legions once cheered Geta's leadership on cold northern frontiers, officers are forced to destroy their own records. Official correspondence is amended, parchments scraped, chronicles rewritten. The men whisper, but only in the barracks, and only at night. To be overheard is to risk a fate worse than silence. In Egypt, the local priests receive orders to remove Geta's name from dedications in temples, to break his statues, to burn offerings made in his honor. Even the sacred ibis of Thoth, accustomed to centuries of offerings, find the rhythm of memory disrupted. The erasure is relentless, all-consuming, bureaucratic. Across Asia Minor, in the Greek cities where Geta was honored as co-emperor, artists and artisans are paid a pittance to update public art, chiseling his face from reliefs, removing his name from dedications. In Antioch, a clever scribe invents a new formula for imperial edicts. To the eternal glory of Caracalla, who rules alone and always has. Copies of letters once signed by both brothers are awkwardly altered, lines blotted out, signatures smeared. For Julia Domna, mother of emperors, the true horror is only beginning. In her private apartments, she is forced to preside over the destruction of everything that bound her family together. Portraits, poems, letters, family heirlooms. She is watched at all times, her words carefully noted by spies. Even her grief is suspect. If she weeps too openly, she is accused of treasonous nostalgia. If she holds her tongue, she is called cold and complicit. In a secret drawer, Julia hides a single token, a ring once worn by Gaeta as a child. At night, when the palace sleeps, she clutches it, remembering the boy he was, the laughter they shared. She knows that if the ring is found, it could mean her own death. She wonders if it is better to forget. Gaeta's surviving friends scatter, some to distant provinces, others into anonymous retirement. A few are arrested, tried for imaginary crimes, their property confiscated, their names added to the long list of enemies of the state. The rest learn the wisdom of silence. To remember Gaeta, even in the privacy of one's own thoughts, is to risk everything. For those tasked with the practical work of erasure, the process is painful and tedious. A mosaicist, once proud to depict the imperial family in glowing tiles, now spends long hours scraping away faces, patching gaps with dull, neutral stones. His hands bleed. His heart aches. It is like cutting away part of my own life, he tells his apprentice. But what else can we do? A scribe, trained for years in the art of beautiful calligraphy, is commanded to tear out chapters from the city annals. Each stroke of the knife is a betrayal of memory. Sometimes, in secret, he copies the lost passages onto scraps of papyrus and hides them in a forgotten corner of the library. He prays that one day someone will find them and remember the truth. A young sculptor, given a commission to create a new bust of Caracalla, spends sleepless nights dreaming of Gaeta's kind eyes, the way the brothers once laughed together at the races. In the end, he sculpts Caracalla's features harder, more severe, hoping the emperor will be pleased, and that his own head will stay attached to his shoulders. For ordinary Romans, the damnatio memoriae is both a spectacle and a warning. Some feel a thrill at the spectacle, watching statues topple, listening to the city crier denounce the traitor Gaeta. Others are afraid, sensing the invisible lines shifting beneath their feet. They wonder if the same fate might one day befall Caracalla, or even themselves. In the taverns, whispers bloom like night flowers. Remember when Gaeta gave grain to the poor? No, I never knew the man. My cousin says he never existed. At festivals, children who once waved pennants bearing both brothers' faces now carry only Caracallas. Old songs are forbidden, old stories quietly rewritten. A grandmother tells her grandchildren of two princes, but omits the younger's name, afraid of what the walls might hear. In the great amphitheater, gladiators jest, fight well, lest they erase your name too. But the laughter is nervous, forced. Everyone knows the price of being remembered by the wrong man. Time passes, decades slip by. Caracalla rules alone, growing ever more suspicious, ever more isolated. His reign is marked by purges, assassinations, and a growing sense of dread. The city bears new scars. Blank spaces where Geta once stood, gaps in the official histories, awkward silences in conversations. And yet, forgetting is never total. Some monuments resist erasure in outlying provinces where the imperial edict arrives late, or not at all. Mosaics still show the two brothers, side by side, riding in triumph. In private homes, mothers whisper Geta's name to children at bedtime, passing on stories of kindness and courage. In the margins of ancient manuscripts, clever scribes leave coded references, symbols only the learned can decipher. Julia Domna survives her sons, her grief hardening into wisdom. She is revered as a symbol of Roman motherhood. But in private, she never forgives Caracalla. When she dies, her funeral is grand, but joyless. Her memory split between two sons, one who killed, one who was killed. Centuries pass. The empire falls. Rome is sacked. The marble of the palaces crumbles into ruin. Future generations walk among the broken columns, picking through fragments of statue and tile. In the Forum, the Arch of Septimius Severus still stands, but keen eyes notice the uneven surface where names were chipped away, the odd gap in the inscription. Who was erased here? They wonder. In dark corners of old libraries, scraps of papyrus surface, letters, edicts, fragments of poetry. Scholars pore over them, piecing together the story of a lost emperor, a brother undone by politics and fear. They reconstruct Geta's face from a handful of surviving coins, a mosaic in a ruined villa, a mention in the private diary of a senator's wife. In these moments, the spell of forgetting is broken, if only briefly. Geta, condemned to silence, speaks again. His story is not heroic, but it is profoundly human. The tale of a man caught between love and rivalry, power and powerlessness, memory and erasure. For the historian, Damnatio Memoriae is not only a Roman story. Every age has its own forms of erasure, photographs airbrushed, names deleted from databases, histories rewritten to suit new rulers. The human impulse to control the past is as strong as the desire to dominate the present. The lesson of Geta is not only about Rome, it is about all of us, and the cost of forgetting. Even now, you can walk the ruins of Rome and touch the scars of that long-ago hatred. You can read the blank stone, the ghostly outlines where a name should be. You can feel for a moment the weight of a memory denied, a life unmade, not only in body, but in every echo that should have remained. And if you listen carefully, as dusk falls on the Forum and the city grows silent, you may sense the presence of those who refused to forget. A mother's grief, a brother's longing, a people's hunger for truth. Their voices are faint, but they persist, threading through the centuries, daring anyone who will listen to remember what was meant to be lost forever. In surviving mosaics, and paintings throughout the former empire, you can still observe the ghostly outlines where Geta's image was carefully scraped away by anonymous craftsmen following imperial orders. These empty spaces speak more powerfully than any written testimony, bearing witness to Rome's sophisticated understanding that being forgotten was infinitely worse than being hated or feared. Damnatio Memoriae revealed the empire's remarkably advanced grasp of psychological warfare and social control. Physical death was ultimately temporary, suffering eventually ended, and martyrs could inspire future generations through their sacrifice. But complete erasure from collective memory meant that a person's entire existence became meaningless retroactively. Their life, achievements, relationships, and even their crimes simply vanished from human consciousness as though they had never occurred. This practice proved particularly effective against political rivals and dynastic threats. An emperor who systematically erased his predecessors could reshape historical narratives to support his own legitimacy and policy decisions. If inconvenient previous rulers had never existed, then current policies required no justification, comparison, or historical context. The Romans understood intuitively that controlling the past was essential to controlling the future. Memory represented power in its purest form, and the ability to grant or deny historical existence was perhaps the ultimate expression of imperial authority over not just bodies and property, but over truth itself. Yet, as we witness these elaborate cruelties and psychological torments, we must remember that the same human creativity that devised such punishments also produced law codes that influenced civilization for centuries, architectural marvels that still inspire wonder, and literary works that continue moving readers today. The capacity for both darkness and brilliance exists within every human heart, every society, every historical period. Perhaps most remarkably, as Christianity gradually spread throughout the Roman Empire, these very practices began to transform. The people who had once been thrown to lions in amphitheaters slowly became the moral conscience of imperial society. Former persecutors evolved into protectors, and customs that had seemed natural and necessary to one generation became unthinkable acts of barbarism to the next. Human nature itself hadn't changed, but the cultural and religious frameworks that guided human behavior had evolved toward greater recognition of universal dignity and divine mercy. But the transformation was neither quick nor simple. It was a slow, painful, and often paradoxical process. It began in shadows, in cramped tenements, in Rome's Trastevere district, in smoky back rooms beneath the villas of wealthy widows, in the catacombs beneath city streets, where flickering lamps and whispered prayers marked the clandestine gatherings of the faithful. Here, Christians met to break bread, to mourn their dead, and to tell stories of a Jewish carpenter who preached forgiveness, healed the sick, and was crucified for refusing to answer violence with violence. For decades, these gatherings were considered a dangerous subversion, a threat to the order of gods and empire. Christian refusal to sacrifice to the emperor, a ritual no Roman took literally, but all saw as a test of loyalty, was baffling and infuriating. What sort of citizen would risk death for a few grains of incense? What kind of law could survive if mercy was extended even to traitors, slaves, and foreigners? The empire responded as it always had, with spectacle, with blood. Martyrs were made in the arena, beneath the gaze of thousands. Their deaths were staged as theater. But something unexpected began to happen. The crowds, hungry for entertainment, sometimes found themselves transfixed not by the violence, but by the serenity of those who died, forgiving their executioners. Stories spread of Perpetua, the noblewoman who smiled as she faced the beasts, of Polycarp, who blessed his torturers, of anonymous slaves whose songs rose above the roar of the crowd, haunting those who came only for the show. These spectacles had the opposite of their intended effect. For every martyr silenced, 2 or 3 witnesses found themselves changed. Some were converted by the sight of such courage, others by the whisper of a neighbor, or the kindness of a Christian in daily life. A Roman matron, once disgusted by tales of secret feasts, discovered her own slave had risked her life to bury plague victims whom no one else would touch. An old centurion, grown weary of war, heard a child recite the words, "Love your enemies," and wept for the first time in years. Meanwhile, the empire itself was changing. War, plague, and famine strained old certainties. The gods seemed silent. Philosophers debated the meaning of virtue, but their schools grew smaller and more insular. Emperors rose and fell with dizzying speed. Armies marched not for Rome, but for their generals. Amidst the chaos, the Christian communities grew, not by force, but by example, by networks of charity, by an ethic that bound rich and poor, citizen and outsider, together as equals in the sight of God. By the early 4th century, the change could not be ignored. Diocletian, fearing the spread of this new faith, unleashed the last great persecution. Churches were burned, scriptures confiscated, bishops imprisoned or killed. Yet even this storm only deepened the resolve of the believers. The blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church, Tertullian wrote, and across the empire his words proved true. Then, suddenly, the world shifted. In 312, as the legend goes, Constantine marched on Rome beneath a banner marked not with the eagle, but with the sign of the cross. In the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, he claimed victory, and soon after, Christianity was legalized. The Edict of Milan declared religious tolerance across the empire, and Christians emerged from hiding, blinking in the daylight, uncertain whether to celebrate or mourn the end of their martyrs' glory. The effects were swift and profound. Within a generation, Christians began to rise to positions of power. Bishops advised emperors. Christian rhetoric shaped imperial law. The bloody games that once filled the Colosseum began to lose their luster. When crowds still clamored for spectacle, they found fewer willing victims. The state, which had once engineered the suffering of thousands for sport and warning, now faced moral rebuke from its own conscience. A bishop in Carthage thundered from the pulpit, "Do not delight in the death of the condemned, but pray for their repentance." For a time, the old and new ways clashed in every city. Some emperors hesitated, wary of alienating the traditional gods and their influential priesthoods. Pagan philosophers argued that the Christian God was weak, his followers soft. In taverns and markets, arguments broke out between neighbors. Statues of Jupiter and Mars looked down upon crowds, who now crossed themselves before entering the forum. Gradually, the games faded. Gladiators, once symbols of virile strength, found new callings as guards, merchants, monks. The great amphitheaters became quiet, their sands no longer stained red, but covered in grass and wildflowers. Some were transformed into churches, their arches ringing not with screams but with hymns. A few, abandoned, became refuges for the poor, fitting perhaps for a faith born among the marginalized. But the transformation was not only external. Roman law itself began to change. Where once the state's power was measured by its capacity to inflict suffering, now it began, haltingly, to recognize limits. Laws against torture were debated. Cruelty in punishment was denounced in the language of Christian mercy, if not always in practice. Even the concept of charity shifted. Once considered the province of the wealthy seeking prestige, it became a moral obligation for all who claimed the name Christian. Old habits died hard. The machinery of the state still wielded terror when threatened, and many new Christians proved as capable of intolerance as their predecessors. But the framework had shifted. Suffering was no longer a spectacle for the crowd, but a tragedy to be mourned, avoided, prevented. The stories of old martyrs, once told in fear, were now recounted as cautionary tales, a reminder of what happens when a society loses sight of compassion. In private homes, the echoes of the past lingered. A grandmother might recall watching Christians die in the arena as a child and shudder at the memory, wondering aloud how anyone could once have found such things entertaining. In the baths, men discussed the latest imperial decrees. Did you hear? They are building a basilica atop the old amphitheater. My father fought as a retiarius there. The world has changed, and I do not know if it is better. A young boy, listening, imagined a future where pain was not the price of order. Beneath the surface, however, the greatest change was less legal or political than spiritual. For centuries, Romans had measured worth in terms of honor, victory, public achievement. To lose in public was to be shamed. To die poorly was to be forgotten. The Christian message challenged this calculus. Here was a faith that honored the meek, blessed the poor, elevated forgiveness above revenge. What you do to the least of these, you do to me, said their Lord. No empire had ever heard such words, nor tried to live by them. The effect was seismic, in fits and starts, with relapses and contradictions. Roman society moved toward a new ideal. Not all were convinced. Many mocked the new morality as weakness. Others feared the loss of order. Yet over time, a new language emerged, the language of dignity, of mercy, of the infinite value of every human soul. Even architecture changed. The very stones of the empire were repurposed. Where temples once stood, churches now rose, often built with the same marble and columns. The sacred and the profane mingled in ways unthinkable before. Baptismal fonts carved from pagan altars, Christian symbols painted over faded mosaics of gods, long silent. And in the silence that followed, something new began to grow. Children played in the ruins of the Colosseum, unaware of the horrors that once transpired there. Poor widows and freed slaves shared bread and wine in the shadows of old imperial arches, their prayers mingling with the wind. Monks gathered in remote valleys, copying the wisdom of old philosophers alongside the new scriptures, preserving both for a world still unborn. Yet the transformation was not total, nor was it perfect. Violence did not vanish. Empires still waged war. Rulers still punished the rebellious. But the shadow of the cross had fallen across the world, and with it, a new standard. Cruelty, once celebrated, was now explained, justified, or most tellingly, hidden. No one boasted any longer of throwing Christians to the lions. Those who sought to revive the old games found themselves shunned or gently corrected, or, if they persisted, remembered with a hint of shame. The story of this transformation is not merely one of victory or defeat, but of the slow, unsteady progress of conscience. For every bishop who denounced cruelty, there was a magistrate who looked away. For every senator who argued for mercy, another demanded order. But the world had turned, and even those who resisted found themselves changed by the new logic, the new hope, the new law, written not in stone, but in the hearts of men and women, from Antioch to Londinium. In the end, this is the lesson Rome bequeathed to the ages, that even the most brutal customs, even the most entrenched systems of violence, can yield to compassion, not easily, not quickly, and never completely, but inevitably, as streams wear down. Stone and spring follows winter, and so, as the centuries rolled on, the children of those once condemned in the arena became bishops, patrons, teachers, healers, lawgivers. The empire, once so proud of its cruelty, was remembered equally for its repentance. The stones of the Colosseum stand today, their shadow a silent reminder of both what was and what, through mercy, can become. Emperor Constantine's conversion to Christianity in the 4th century marked the beginning of the end for many of Rome's cruelest practices. Crucifixion was officially abolished, gladiatorial games were gradually restricted, and amphitheaters slowly shifted from execution venues to athletic facilities. The transformation wasn't immediate or complete, but it represented a fundamental shift in how civilization viewed human suffering and divine justice. This historical transformation reminds us that even the most entrenched social practices can change when societies evolve their understanding of human dignity, moral responsibility, and spiritual truth. What appeared natural and necessary to one generation can become abhorrent and incomprehensible to their children and grandchildren. Now, as we gently transition from these harsh realities of ancient justice towards something more beautiful and uplifting, let us turn our attention to one of humanity's greatest and most universal achievements, the discovery and development of music itself. If Roman punishments reveal some of the darkest aspects of human creativity, music represents perhaps our species' most luminous accomplishment. Long before there were sophisticated instruments, before written notation systems, before concert halls or recording technology, there was rhythm. In prehistoric caves across Europe, around flickering fires that pushed back the darkness of an uncertain world, our earliest ancestors discovered something extraordinary: the power of organized sound to move the human soul in ways that mere words could never achieve. Picture our distant relatives, perhaps 40,000 years ago, huddled against bitter cold in a limestone cave somewhere in what we now call Germany. One curious individual picks up a hollow bird bone, notices how the wind makes it whistle when blown across the opening, and begins to experiment with deliberate intention. Carefully, methodically, they bore small holes at precise intervals along the bone's length. When they blow air into this primitive flute, something emerges that has never before existed in the natural world: a melody created entirely by human imagination and skill. These ancient bone flutes, discovered by archaeologists in sites like Hohlfels Cave, represent one of humanity's earliest technological achievements. But unlike tools for hunting game or making fire, these instruments served no obvious survival purpose that we can identify. They were created purely for the joy and wonder of making beautiful sounds, suggesting that even our most ancient ancestors valued artistic beauty as much as they valued physical survival. The mathematical precision of these prehistoric flutes remains remarkable, even by modern standards. The finger holes were carefully measured and positioned to produce specific musical notes and coherent scales. This wasn't random experimentation or accidental discovery. It represented early engineering applied directly to artistic expression. Our ancestors understood complex mathematical relationships between pitch and frequency thousands of years before they developed writing systems sophisticated enough to record such abstract knowledge. Why did they invest precious time and energy in creating music? Perhaps these early instruments served practical purposes we can barely imagine today. Music might have been used for hunting, accurately mimicking animal calls to attract prey within range. It could have been deeply religious, connecting tribal communities with spirits, ancestors, or gods through sacred sounds that transcended ordinary speech. Maybe it was primarily social, helping to bond scattered groups together through shared rhythm, melody, and emotional experience. But most likely, humans first made music for exactly the same reason they continue making it today: because it feels profoundly good to both create and hear beautiful sounds. Music triggers powerful emotional responses that appear to be hardwired into our basic neurological structure. A sorrowful melody can bring tears to our eyes. A joyful rhythm can make our bodies dance involuntarily. A gentle lullaby can calm a crying infant within moments. These responses seem to be universal, transcending differences in culture, language, historical period, and individual experience. As human civilizations developed greater complexity and sophistication, musical expression evolved accordingly. In ancient Mesopotamia, the fertile region between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, where agriculture was invented and the first cities rose from the earth, music advanced from simple bone flutes to elaborate stringed instruments of remarkable beauty and craftsmanship. The famous bull-headed lyre, discovered in the royal cemetery at Ur, dating back over 45 centuries, represents a quantum leap in both musical sophistication and artistic achievement. This wasn't merely a functional instrument for producing pleasant sounds, but a masterwork of decorative art, its resonating body inlaid with precious shell and brilliant blue lapis lazuli, its sound box crowned with a magnificent golden bull's head that seemed to gaze directly into the souls of listeners. Creating such an instrument required skilled craftsmen, expensive imported materials, and a culture that valued musical beauty enough to invest enormous resources in its creation and preservation. This wasn't survival technology, it was civilization expressing its highest aspirations through sound, rhythm, and visual splendor combined into transcendent artistic unity. As our gentle journey through history draws toward its peaceful conclusion, we find ourselves contemplating the remarkable contradiction that defines human existence. The same species that devised elaborate torments and psychological cruelties also created the first melodies, discovered harmony, and filled the world with songs that still move us across thousands of years. Perhaps this contradiction is precisely what makes us human, our infinite capacity for both cruelty and beauty, fear and wonder, destruction and creation. Tonight, as you drift toward sleep, let the memory of those ancient flutes carry you gently into dreams. 40,000 years ago, someone remarkably similar to yourself sat by a glowing fire, picked up a simple, hollow bone, and discovered that human beings could create beauty from nothing more than breath, intention, and the mysterious gift of imagination. In that magical moment, music was born into the world, and existence itself became a little more beautiful, a little more hopeful, a little more gloriously human. Sleep peacefully now, and let the echoes of history's first songs guide you safely through the gentle darkness toward morning's light.